Hello, my name is Carol Bertsch, and I'm an elder law attorney. Today we're going to talk about finding long-term care. We're going to start with a simple scenario. We've got Uncle Fred, and unfortunately Uncle Fred has gotten to the point where he can't stay in his home by himself anymore. His nephew, Jason, wants to help him, but Uncle Fred doesn't have any money. So what does Jason do? The first thing he wants to do is find a nursing home that accepts Medicaid, that has a Medicaid bed open, and that will accept a Medicaid pending resident. Now let's break that down. First, he's got to find a nursing home. Why is that? Because Medicaid is a government program, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what Medicaid is, that helps pay for long-term care like Uncle Fred needs. Uncle Fred can't live by himself anymore. He's got to have assistance. Although there are lots of ways to get the assistance he needs, he doesn't have any money. So some of those options are not available to him. For example, he could go to an assisted living facility if he had money. He could go to a personal care home if he had money. He could even go to maybe an independent living community and have caregivers come in to help him. But he doesn't have enough money for any of those. So we have to start with a nursing home. That's because most Medicaid dollars go to pay for a nursing home. We want a nursing home that accepts Medicaid. We're talking about Texas Medicaid here. Most nursing homes in Texas do accept Medicaid. There are some that don't, so of course you have to call and make sure that they do. Even if they accept Medicaid and they have Medicaid help pay for their residents, remember that with Uncle Fred, we're starting with no money whatsoever. So we have to take him to the nursing home that will accept him as a Medicaid pending resident. Some nursing homes are going to say, we accept Medicaid and we have a Medicaid bed open, but you have to pay up front. And then when Medicaid gets approved, it will pay us and we'll refund you your money. We can't do that with Uncle Fred because he doesn't have any money. So we have to go to a nursing home that will accept him Medicaid pending. Okay? Well, let's just figure out what is Medicaid. It's a government program that helps pay for long-term care like Fred needs. But remember, it's a government program with both state and federal rules. So some of the rules come from Washington, D.C., and some of the rules are based on the state. That means that every state's Medicaid program is different. In this video, we're talking about Texas Medicaid. Because it's a government program, it depends on what Congress does and what the legislature does, what the state legislature does. That means that the program can change over time. We're talking about what Texas Medicaid is like in 2018. Medicaid may be the same in 2019, or it may be different. So you've got to follow up. You've got to check with an elder law attorney. So when we're looking at qualifying for this government program to help pay for nursing home care, what is the government looking at? We're looking at what assets Fred has, what his monthly income is, and what his health is like. Now, I'm not going to talk about specific numbers here because, as we said, Medicaid can change over time. But one number hasn't changed in a long time, so I am going to say it, and that is $2,000. That means Fred can have assets of no more than $2,000 in order to qualify for Medicaid. Now, there's countable assets that Medicaid counts, and there's exempt assets that Medicaid doesn't count. Fred's home is not a countable asset. That means that if he has his home and he has a checking account and he's only got $1,000 in his checking account, which remember I said Fred doesn't have any money, so that's basically it. He's got $1,000. Well, asset-wise, he's going to qualify. His home doesn't count. His checking account does, but it's got less than $2,000 in it. He can also have one vehicle. One vehicle is an exempt resource for Medicaid. He can also have a prepaid funeral plan or a burial plot, and a burial plot. Those are exempt. But everything else pretty much is a countable asset. If Fred had an IRA, if he had investment accounts, let's say he had a little bit of a mineral interest down in South Texas, that would count. If he had a lot on the lake, that would count. Remember, his homestead doesn't count, but his other property does count. And if he had other vehicles, those would count. So in Fred's case, we're in good shape because we don't have more in countable assets than $2,000. But let's say we have someone who has some IRAs and some investment accounts. They're not going to qualify for Medicaid right away. So we have to think about some other options for them. But let's get back to Fred. Now remember I said that Medicaid also looks at income. This is kind of a weird situation because income is never an obstacle to nursing home Medicaid eligibility. Medicaid says that if your income is over a certain amount, you don't qualify. But wait, if your income is over a certain amount and you don't qualify, you have to jump through some extra hoops, and then you do qualify. So, kind of confusing. The thing to remember is that if you need nursing home Medicaid, don't worry about your income being too high. Someone might tell you, oh no, your income is over the income cap. Remember, because we can jump through some extra hoops, then you get to qualify for nursing home Medicaid. I'm not going to go into the details of those extra hoops because I don't want to get us bogged down in those nitty-gritty things. I want to give us just an overview of what we need to do if we have to find long-term care. Now, in Fred's case, his income is low, so we don't even have to worry about jumping through those extra hoops. Let's say his income is $1,500 a month. He's below the income cap. He's going to qualify for Medicaid based on his assets and based on his income. But let's also talk about medical necessity. Remember I said there's 3 elements for Medicaid: resources or assets, income, and medical necessity. Medical necessity is a little bit more than just you're a person with a disability or you're incapacitated. Medical necessity in Texas means that you regularly require the services of a licensed professional, like an LVN or an RN. In Texas, the easiest way to meet medical necessity is to have dementia. So it's a little bit ironic if we're looking at someone who can't live alone any longer and we say, oh, why? Do they have dementia? Well, that's a good thing because that means they're going to meet medical necessity because they're unable to self-medicate. There are other ways to meet medical necessity as well, but that's the most common. In Fred's case, he's got a lot of things wrong with him. He's had a stroke and he's not able to, he's somewhat paralyzed on one side, so he's not able to provide for himself. And the stroke also affected his ability to speak, and so he's not able to communicate and tell someone, hey, I need to take this medicine right now. He's not able to do that for himself. So he's going to meet medical necessity. So there's Fred. What did we do? We said, we've got someone who doesn't have any money. What are we going to do for him? We're going to find a nursing home that accepts Medicaid, has a Medicaid bed open, and accepts him Medicaid Pending. Now let's say we have someone who's not in such dire straits as Fred. Let's say we have a couple. Let's call them Sam and Luana. And Sam and Luana have some money. Remember we talked about countable resources. Well, Sam has an IRA, and he and Luana have some investments, and he and Luana have a house and 2 cars, and they have maybe some bank accounts and savings accounts and CDs. Well, with Sam and Luana, let's say that Luana is the one who needs care. We don't have to immediately go to the nursing home because Luana and Sam have some money. We can look at those other options. We can look at assisted living. We can look at a personal care home. We can look at getting caregivers into the home. Let's say with Sam and Luana, we want caregivers to come into the home. Well, we can actually go ahead and look for Medicaid, because Medicaid has some dollars that will pay for caregivers to come into the home. Remember, I didn't offer that with Fred, because the caregivers who come into the home under Medicaid will not provide 24-hour care. That Medicaid program does not provide 24-hour care. So Fred couldn't have stayed home. He didn't have money to pay for someone to take over after those Medicaid caregivers left. But with Sam and Luana, we've got a situation where we can look at maybe bringing in Medicaid caregivers, or let's say that Luana's situation is so serious, maybe she's gotten to the point with her Alzheimer's that she's up all night and Fred can't stay up and watch her and then be able to do anything during the day. So maybe nursing home care is appropriate for her. Either way, we're looking at a couple. And remember I said that Fred can have no more than $2,000 in countable resources. Well, that's the same for Luana. Luana can have no more than $2,000 in countable resources. But Sam, as her spouse, is allowed to keep more. We don't want to make Sam impoverished just so that Luana can get the care that she needs. So Medicaid law has rules that prevent spousal impoverishment. So first, what we do is take all of the countable resources that Sam and Luana have. Now remember, just because Luana inherited some money from her uncle, that's countable, just because it's hers. Or just because Sam inherited some property from his parents, it's still countable. Even if it's separate property, not community property, as long as it belongs to either one of the couple, it's going to count. Their homestead doesn't count. One car doesn't count. And their prepaid funeral plans, if they have them, don't count. But everything else we put together, and then we cut it in half. Now, of course, we're only doing this on paper. We're not cutting all the assets in half right now. We're on paper calculating, okay, Sam, you get to keep half of these assets up to a certain amount, and that amount changes every year. But let's just use an example. Let's say that Sam and Luana have $100,000 in countable resources. Sam gets to keep half, $50,000, and because that's less than the maximum, he gets to keep the whole $50,000. Let's say that Sam and Luana had $400,000 in countable resources. Put that together, cut it in half. $200,000 is allocated to Sam. Well, that's more than the maximum that he's allowed to keep. So he only keeps this year in 2018 $123,000. Luana, meanwhile, can have no more than $2,000 in countable resources. So let's go back to our $100,000 example. Sam keeps 50, Luana keeps 2, and we've got $48,000 on Luana's side that we have to do something with. Let's put aside that $48,000 for just a minute and talk about the monthly income of the couples. The well spouse, in this case Sam, keeps all of his monthly income, but the ill spouse, in this case Luana, is going to pay some of her income either to the nursing home or to Sam. And that reminds me, I forgot to mention, when Fred goes into the nursing home, his monthly income is going to pay the nursing home as his share of the cost. He's going to be able to keep $60 a month for himself, for his personal needs allowance. The rest of his income goes to the nursing home because he's single. When we have a married couple, the ill spouse is going to either pay the nursing home with her income or have it kept by the spouse at home for the spouse at home to use to pay his bills that he still has coming in. In Fred and Luana's case, their combined monthly income is low enough that, remember that $48,000 I said that we had to do something with? They're able to keep that $48,000 because when you add Sam's income and Luana's income, it's less than the maximum or the minimum that Medicaid says a person who lives in the home, the well spouse, can keep. So if their monthly income, the couple together, is lower than a certain amount, this year it's $3,090, we can keep more resources. But let's say that Sam's income is $2,500 a month. And let's say that Luana's income is $3,000 a month. Well, that is greater than $3,090. So a little bit of Luana's income is going to be diverted to Sam. But most of her income is going to pay the nursing home. So Sam's going to be able to keep his money, his monthly income, and a little bit of Luana's, but most of hers is going to be her share of the cost of the nursing home. And then Medicaid is going to make up the rest. Now this may seem unfair, but remember that if the nursing home costs $5,000 or $6,000 a month, and Luana's income is only $3,000, she's still getting Medicaid to pay another $2,000 to $3,000 a month to help her get the care that she needs. Well, let's say that we've got Sam and Luana with their income that I mentioned, and so we've got some of Luana's income going to the nursing home, some of it going to Sam, but we've got that $48,000 that we need to do something with. Remember, Luana's is able to keep only $2,000, and we've got $48,000 extra dollars. What are we going to do with that? Well, one thing that makes sense is to pay off any debt that Sam and Luana have, because paying down their debt is absolutely okay with Medicaid. And it's going to make the cost of living for Sam cheaper, so that when he has that lower monthly income, he's not going to be so pressed for expenses. Another thing that we can do is make improvements and repairs to the home. This is always a great idea because Sam might not have that money to pay for improvements later on. We've got this $48,000. Let's use it. Let's say that Sam says, I've got 2 older vehicles. They're both 10 years old. I'm going to sell those. I'm going to use the proceeds from the sale of those vehicles plus some of that $48,000 and buy a new reliable vehicle that I know I can depend on in the years to come. Or we could buy anything that would enhance Luana's quality of life in the nursing home. A TV, a recliner if she's got enough room in enough space in her room, anything that would make her more comfortable. Anytime we spend on Sam and Luana, that is okay with Medicaid. The only time that Medicaid has a concern is when we spend on someone else. Well, let's talk about spending on someone else. The Medicaid application says, have you made any gifts in the last 60 months or 5 years? And if you have, then there's a question of what did you do? Some gifts are all right, but some gifts create a penalty period. Gifts that don't create a penalty period are things like giving to a 529 plan or a Uniform Transfer to Minors Act account for a child who's under 21. Gifts to a person with a disability or to a sole benefit trust for a person with a disability are also not penalized. Those are ways that we can take that $48,000 that we have and dispose of that money and benefit Sam and Luana emotionally. For example, let's say Sam and Luana have a child with a disability and they want to make sure that that child has everything that she needs. We can make gifts to that child and not have a penalty. Or they have grandchildren and they want to provide for the grandchildren's education. Those are gifts that are okay. Now remember, this is in Texas in 2018. Other states are different, and things may be different later on in Texas. So keep that in mind. We can also make gifts and incur a penalty period. Medicaid says for every day's worth of nursing home care you give away, that's a day we won't pay for your care. So if you're giving a gift to a child and that child doesn't have a disability, or it's not a grandchild in a Uniform Transfer to Minors Act account, any of those gifts that create a penalty, we can still use a technique to, say, make a gift of 20 of that $48,000 we have that's Luana's. We can give 20 of it away and then use the other 20 to purchase a certain Medicaid compliant annuity that will help cover the penalty period, the period of disqualification, and still qualify for Medicaid once the penalty period has expired. Or we can always make a gift now, wait 5 years, and then apply for Medicaid. So you're waiting the 5-year look-back period. That doesn't really make a lot of sense in situations where we've got a person like Luana who's already needing nursing home care. But maybe if we were doing some pre-planning, someone might choose to do a gift and wait out the 5 years. Now, one thing I haven't covered yet that's very important to remember, Medicaid says if you qualify for these benefits, we're letting you have the homestead. It's an exempt resource. But upon your death, we want to make a claim against the homestead. We want your family to sell the home, pay us back for what we spent on your care, and then we recover for what we spent, and your family, if there's any money left after that, gets what's left over. This is called the Medicaid Estate Recovery Program, or MERP. It's important to know that when you apply for Medicaid, you're going to be presented with a MERP form, and you're going to have to acknowledge that you understand that Medicaid is going to make this claim. But remember, if there is a surviving spouse, Medicaid does not make a MERP claim. So in Sam and Luana's case, if Sam, when Luana goes into the nursing home, Sam is going to, and applies for Medicaid, Sam is going to sign, yes, I understand, MERP, you're going to make a claim. If Luana dies first, Sam is home free. Medicaid is never going to claim on Luana's care because Sam was alive at the time of Luana's death. If there is a child with a disability living at the death of the Medicaid recipient, that's another exception to MERP, and MERP is not going to make a claim because we have a child with a disability. If Sam and Luana had an adult child, let's call that person Ray, who lived in the house with them and was unmarried, at Luana's death, even if Sam was already dead, if we had the unmarried child living in the house for more than a year prior to Luana's death, then we don't have any estate recovery. And there are some other exceptions to estate recovery too. So don't be scared off from using Medicaid just because of the MERP prospect. Use the benefit that is there to get the care that the person needs. Now let's go back to Fred there. He doesn't have a spouse and he doesn't have any children. He goes into the nursing home. There's his house that's an exempt resource. What do? Well, if Fred has mental capacity, he can do something called a ladybird deed and say that upon his death, the house will transfer to his nephew, Jason. That avoids the MERP recovery because upon Fred's death, the house automatically passes to Jason. On the other hand, they may not want to do that because while Fred is in the nursing home, all of his money is going to pay the nursing home except for $60 a month. That means that Jason is going to be responsible for the taxes and the insurance and the upkeep on the house. So Jason may not want that burden. But if he's willing to take it, we can avoid estate recovery even in the case of Fred. So I have talked in very general terms without going into a lot of the nitty-gritty details. It's important that you see an elder law attorney who can help you plan if you have assets. But if you're in the case of someone like Fred, you don't need to do any planning. What you need to do is, you don't need to do any Medicaid planning, like with your money. You need to be able to find a facility that is Medicaid certified, has a Medicaid bed open, and will accept Fred Medicaid Pending so that you can immediately get the care that you need. Thanks a lot.